So, but you're Gen Z, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And don't quote me on that, but I believe I'm right. That's why they call them Zoomers. But anyways.
Or because most of their adult life has been spent on Zoom.
Then I guess I'm what do you call it? Honorary Zoomer? Because that's all I freaking do, dude. I'm so tired of Zoom. Do you like it? Do you like selling? Okay. Then you're just like me. I'd much prefer to do this with another human being. And
I love being in person. It was interesting, and I'd be happy to talk about this on it too.
Well, we're probably rolling. I mean, we may not use it, but just we're rolling. Okay, cool. So if you want to just go ahead and say what you were going to say.
Yeah, what was interesting for me, so right after, or I think it was right before COVID had hit, I had started Andy Neary's mastermind class.
Oh yeah.
And I had already signed up, but then COVID hit, so we moved to virtual, and so that was interesting. And I was a little bummed because, again, I wanted to be in front of people and meet everyone face to face. But what I learned a lot throughout all of those conversations and just throughout COVID, when it first had come into play, was being forced remote. I realized everything that I was confident in and my ability to sell was winning people over in person. And I took every strength that I thought I had, and it was removed. So I was in a real big panic mode there for a while, and insecurities were coming up, and I just realized it was ultimately a time, and I think our former CEO, Rod Reason, had shared, and I don't think this was his quote, but I forget who had mentioned it, that coming out of the pandemic and when people go back to real world, you'll either become a hunk, a chunk, or a punk. Okay. And you won't know now, but it'll be very obvious later. And so obviously I wanted to go hunk, but you can't spell chunk without hunk, so I kind of did a hybrid role. But what COVID made me do, and the work from home era that we're kind of still in, made me flex a lot of muscles that I had never worked before.
That's actually a really interesting perspective. I've never heard the hunk, chunk, and punk, but it's tongue in cheek a little bit too. Yeah. But you're exactly right. And I think, as weird as it sounds, if COVID hadn't happened, I wouldn't be doing a podcast. Yeah. Because it forced me to go, well, I can't go now in a meeting and bring some coffee and charm people in person or whatever. It's well, what am I supposed to do now? It's well, that's where this whole notion of content creation and whiteboard videos and all those things came from. It's literally an origin story I've told on video before, but it's that thing was like a big mirror holding up to yourself and going, what am I good at? And if those things are now removed, like you said, you've either got to kind of reinvent yourself or you fail, right?
Yeah. And, a mentor of mine, his name's Scott Pyle, he always says the fortune's in the follow-up. And, I had a certain way that I was really confident about when it was in person. I would do deliveries of, allocated bourbon bottles that I would collect. And so that was kind of my thing. I would do a lot of handwritten note cards. But then COVID hit, and it was am I spreading germs? Can I still show up to people's offices? If they're not there, do they want me to have their home address? So then even that era, I also had to pivot, and we had to use different technologies to send virtual gift cards that they could kind of cash in on their own. It was it
What's
shifted
the notion
a lot.
of what got you here won't get you there, right? And what got us here, we were all forced to go, well, I don't know if that's going to get me there. Now, I don't even know what there is after this, right? So I really appreciate you adding that perspective, Mike, and obviously I want to include that. So let's just go ahead and introduce you now so we don't lose that footage, because that was a brilliant way to segue into the introduction of Mike Pattengale, but I'll go ahead and formally do it. I'm here with Mike Pattengale, and you told me you're the mid-market practice leader at Springbuk. Is that correct? Awesome.
That is correct.
And that is a recent new promotion title for you. So tell me, congrats, by the way, but tell me a little bit about what that means for your daily life.
Yeah. So in that role, I have a team underneath me. I like to consider it more alongside, because I would say most conversations we're all, looping each other in. It's a good team camaraderie, which I appreciate. But really my focus is on the mid-market. So all of our consultant or broker relations, a lot of our captives will roll up to my team. And then in addition to overseeing the team of sales reps, I'm also running point on our conversations with different TPAs in market as well.
Cool. So I mean, you're basically, does that make you practice leaders in your title, but does that make you kind of the leader of the sales team effectively, or
for the mid-market. So we have it broken out into mid-market and enterprise at Springbuk. And so really, since all of my relationships have been in the broker consultant world, I wanted to really hone in on see how I can further develop those relationships. So, that's where I'm focused. And then Jen Jones, the other host of the Springbuk podcast, who she is the enterprise practice leader.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, very cool. I just wanted to congratulate you, man, because I know that was a big step up for your career. We're going to cover your backstory real quick before we get into Springbuk.
Yeah.
Data analytics. I'll talk to the camera. Data analytics is what we'll cover today in today's episode, and really dig into what that means, how that can help employers. Obviously, brokers need to be talking about this with their employers nowadays, or you're going to be it's a losing proposition if you're not, in my opinion. But before we do that, let's learn about you, Mr. Pattengale. Tell me a little bit of your history. Where did you grow up? Your educational career, and then obviously your work career as well.
Yeah. So going all the way back, I like to call this out. I was actually born in a suburb, I'll use loosely, of Los Angeles called Glendora, California. I think that's where like the volume and the color of my hair really came into play.
You do have good volume. I mean,
I'm just trying to be
guy,
like you.
You got great volume, man.
But was born there. My dad was a history professor at Zeus Pacific University. Great D2 soccer program. But we ended up moving to Michigan and ultimately Marion, Indiana, for his job. But I think he really wanted to introduce my brothers and I to seasonal depression and anxiety. So
did he succeed?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So
go dad.
Ended up moving away after college for about a year and a half to Birmingham, Alabama, but ultimately relocated back to Indianapolis, where I've been ever since. So
it sounds like that's where you're probably going to be for a while. I mean, do you consider it home?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So where I grew up most of my childhood was actually on a farm outside of Marion, Indiana. It's maybe an hour to an hour and a half north of where Indianapolis is. But Indy is a special place. It's so connected. And I think that's a huge part of who I am is connecting people and being a part of whatever city I'm involved in. I think that love and need for that came from my time in Birmingham and some of the mentors that I had there. Just seeing their love and involvement for the city has really played a key part into what I've always wanted to do in whatever city I called home. And so Indy is, it's the capital of Indiana. It's a big city. But it's so easy to connect with people. Yeah. Like you're at most 2 steps removed from any human being in Indianapolis, which is rare.
Well, and you see, we had the joke about introducing you to seasonal affective disorder. Is it so just because the winters are so cold, or what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, going from Glendora,
California,
and then Indiana, man, it gets cold, but it's a boring cold where all you do is kind of hibernate. You just pack on pounds, you eat, you drink, and you watch TV or movies when it gets cold out. Whereas, a lot of friends that live in, Colorado, Montana, you can ski, snowboard, you can do a lot of that stuff when it's cold. You can kind of just complain about it in Indy, but
you sound like you're really good at complaining about it.
So I am.
You've got to practice.
Not the rabbit hole I planned on going down, but here we are.
That's what I love. Before I forget though, that suit I was complimenting you earlier on that suit.
Yeah,
I imagine that wasn't a suit that originated from the farms of Indiana.
No, I actually bought it. Back to our talk about Instagram ads. Bought it. It was advertised to me on Instagram. After like the third one, I figured I had to do it. So shout out to Scene Studio for constantly bombarding me. But I bought it for a wedding in Miami. One of my wife and I's favorite and best couple friends were getting married, and unfortunately it was delayed. So I didn't get it in time for the wedding.
So what'd you wear to the wedding?
I don't even remember.
T-shirt and shorts.
No, I probably could have. I don't remember, but I wore the sport coat that I had made.
Yeah.
But now I just feel like I got to get my money's worth out of it.
Well, I was going to say, like, for anybody that's watching on camera, that suit actually came directly out of a suitcase like half an hour ago, and it looks amazing. So I got to figure out what that material is, man.
Yeah.
But just want to give you a shout out because that's a good looking suit. And you even asked me beforehand, like, what do I wear to your podcast? Man?
Yeah.
I'm like, wear something you would wear to your biggest deal that you're ever going to close. That's what you should wear, right?
Yeah, because this is the biggest deal I'm ever. No, yeah, I mean, you are the king of sport coats and known in our industry, so I can't come in wearing some crap I got at JCPenney in high school.
Fair enough,
so
man. Respect. Well, so let's get back on the notion, and again, I took us down that rabbit hole this time. That one's my fault, but I love BSing a little bit before we get into the technical stuff, man.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I want to compliment you on, which I think is what brought you onto my radar, is that I met you at conferences. We were talking about, I think, Saya, the Future Leaders, about 6-7 years ago was the first time we hung out. But you are one of the best salespeople I've ever seen operate at a sales conference. And I share with colleagues of mine about this guy Mike. Every time I go to see him at a conference, he's like, he's got to go to this bar because he's got somebody there, and then he's got 30 minutes because he's got to go back to the hotel. It's like you have mastered the art of selling within a conference. And it's impressive, man. So where does that skill set derive from? Break free from rising pharmacy costs with EHIM, powered by ProCare RX. Are you working with a marketing PBM or one that owns their own systems and services? EHIM is a full solution pharmacy benefit manager committed to lowering costs through creative formularies and white glove member care. They truly do every service in-house. Year after year, this allows our clients to experience significantly lower overall and specialty drug trends than the industry average. As a manager of pharmacy benefits, EHIM believes in doing things differently by putting people first, working with them every step of the way, from walkthrough implementation to lasting member engagement. Visit EHIMRX.com to learn more about their custom plan designs and lowest net cost savings.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think, back to when we had prepped for this podcast, you'd said, I want to know who Mike Pattengale is. And I think that was the, between knowing what to wear on this episode and then being able to answer that question, as I was talking to my wife, I was like, man, I think I'm overthinking this. And I definitely was. It's, I'm told as a Scorpio, that's something that I do. But, I think really what it came down to is I'm a connector, and then I'm also a storyteller. And I think I learned the importance of connecting just watching my dad my whole life. I was fortunate. I have great parents. Again, as I was saying before, my dad is not a businessman, never really had that sort of role. He was always a history professor. And then eventually became more of a leadership role within the university that he worked at, now Indiana Wesleyan University, where his title is way longer than mine, so I won't go into all that. But he really helps cultivate a culture of publication within the faculty there.
Okay.
And then he was awarded what's called university professor. He's the only person in the history of the school since 1901 or 1920 that has ever received it.
Wow.
And it means that unanimously any school that he's affiliated with, so like Harvard, Baylor, all the sister schools of Indiana Wesleyan, Azusa, they all had to come together and unanimously agree that he had achieved the highest level of success both personally and professionally.
Wow, that's outstanding.
Yeah, it was a really cool thing. And just throughout this, how he got there is he is the ultimate connector. And so I think I learned a ton from him just on so many things he would do as a kid where he would be spending a ton of free time, where it was a little annoying to me as a kid. I wanted to go out and play catch, but instead I was golfing with him and one of his buddies. I had golf clubs with me. I was like 9 or 10, so I was terrible. But just learning the importance of what a relationship is and how to help people even when you get nothing in return.
Well, and so as you said a connector and a storyteller too.
Yeah.
So obviously being a history expert, I imagine he's reading stories, he's interpreting stories, he's narrating those to a class, I'm sure, and obviously he's published, I'm sure, many times over. But like, is he a good storyteller? Would you consider like he's taught you that art or not?
Depends who you ask.
Okay.
No, he's a great storyteller, and he tells a lot of stories. I've just heard a lot of them.
Yeah, so like you're like, Dad, I've heard this 17 times
let's
already.
skip that. No, but he honestly, he's the top caliber of fathers that exist in the world, and so learned a ton from him, and then a lot from a mentor of mine locally in the community.
Well, when did you discover though that like you had the ability to recount stories and tell them?
Yeah, I always say I've been brokering deals between friends since I was a kid.
Okay.
Never was a drug dealer. I'll go on record. Didn't mean it
You
that
heard
way.
it.
Yeah. But I was in bands growing up. I always was trying to find ways. Like my bands might not have been good at all, but I always had a drum endorsement. I would try to get like a clothing endorsement. I just understood how stuff like that worked, and I was like, well, I love talking, as you've learned very quickly on this episode. So no shortage of breath on my end, but it was like, hey, I'm going to be living out of a tour bus or a tour van, to be more accurate, and I'm going to be in all of these different communities. So if you give me like a sticker to put on the front of my drums or like a shirt to wear, and you're willing to like either pay me for it or like give me something in exchange for free, I think that's really ultimately when I started to realize that I had actually learned a lot from my dad in that sense.
Cool.
And I think the other part came specifically from a mentor of mine named Dave Neff, who he is an extreme connector specific to indie, but then and he actually ironically played a huge role in me getting introduced to Springbuk.
Okay.
But then hearing him kind of affirm these things that I had thought and kind of pushed to the side of this being like a skill set or a hobby of mine, it really wasn't until after college that I actually started to pay attention to that and find that really was a huge passion of mine.
Well, and so you said after college, so you were telling me a little bit of your backstory because I didn't know kind of your career trajectory and path. You said you flipped houses for a really brief period of time, but unsuccessfly so, right? So what happened there?
I like to say houses flipped me. I hate myself for that one. Yeah.
You're a drummer, right?
Yeah, that's fair. In college, the other thing to go back to some of the things I had learned from my father, I learned the importance of mentorship when I was in middle school.
Okay.
And so many people I don't think realize that to their adults. So I've had a mentor by the name of Dwight Ott since I was 16. His son was actually born the day before me. I grew up in youth group with him, and I always just really admired Dwight. He was this like younger, super successful CFO, always like looked the coolest, was like a fit, successful, like really humble, godly man. And I always wanted to be just like Dwight. So eventually I reached out and asked to grab breakfast with him. And so we started grabbing breakfast like once a month. I think just throughout a lot of that, I learned a ton from Dwight on the importance of mentorship. And I think trying to condense this down into the shortest answer here.
It's long-form podcast. It's all good.
Yeah. So I think and now I'm blanking on what
flipping houses.
Yeah. So Dwight had told me, hey, rather than spending all this money to pay the university to live on campus, what you should do is you should actually, see if either your parents would loan you money or the bank would, and buy a house and get some friends to rent from you. And so I was 19 maybe. I had no money. Thankfully, my dad was willing to kind of partner alongside of me, and we had gotten this property. We ended up flipping it, and so at the end of it, I had paid my way through college. I had roommates that had paid rent, and we were able to kind of leave that with a little bit of profit. I think if I go back, I should have done it differently, but I ended up using that money to buy tools, launch an LLC, and then start flipping houses alongside of a friend of mine who's a bit older than me. And we were doing really well at first. And I remember the first check came in, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a millionaire by the time I'm 25. And then that check was the only check I got for like 2 months. 2 months turned into 3, and I was like, hey, what's going on? And he was like, well, this is just how it works. Like, you didn't spend all that. And I was like, dude, I spent it immediately.
In like a week.
Yeah. I thought this was like,
I thought this was a paycheck. Yeah.
And ultimately, we just had one deal kind of go south, and ended up losing a good bit of money. And I think I was 23 or 24 at the time. And so it was that ultimately gave me the final kick in my butt to actually take a corporate sales job. And I'm very thankful for it.
Yeah. But yeah, it's that always that early success, right? That like teases you, like, oh, I got this. I'm a pro. And then you get humbled, unfortunately. And a lot of times there's things outside of your control, right? It doesn't always speak to, oh, you made a mistake or you did something wrong, although you might admit you might have made some mistakes. But it's like there are forces beyond your control, market forces, just bad decision here or there that can completely derail thing. So what was it? What was the final nail in the coffin for you?
Yeah, I think for me in that whole part of my life was, I remember at the time I was dating my now wife, and it was cool because when we first met, I had a ton of money. I was doing really well. That was like during the peak of me blowing through that first paycheck. But then I would be getting up at like 3 a.m. to go drive to a site, 2 hours away from where I lived, and I was just never available.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of my friends it was summertime. They were like, hey, we're going to a John Mayer concert. Do you want to go? And it's like, oh crap, I want to go, but I just had a water leak in this house, 2 hours away, and it's a Saturday, and I need to go fix it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's money out of my pocket.
Yeah.
And so it's just a lot of those things that I think I wasn't ready for. I wanted to just have an 8 to 5 and clock in, clock out sort of thing. And, while the money really, it was tough to lose and give that up, it was the quality of life that just was
that's what I mean. I had a gentleman that came on the podcast a couple weeks ago. He started a salon here. It's called the Gents Place, and his name's Ben Davis, and started with this idea of like kind of a more masculine but men's salon, like a club where you go and you get whiskey and you get a straight razor shave and a good haircut and stuff like that. But one of the things he was saying, he's standing up as a result of what he's learned over the last 15 years of that business and other businesses he's built, is that sometimes entrepreneurs get themselves trapped, right? So his podcast is going to be called Untrapped, where it's like, hey, you had this notion of I became an entrepreneur because I wanted freedom and I wanted complete control over my life, only to discover that actually you're further I would say handcuffed by this profession now, and you're working 80 hours a week instead of 50, and all of a sudden you find yourself trapped within the framework of the business that you built and imprisoned yourself with. And so I think what you're saying kind of resonated with me, hearing him say that as well. And so he wanted to teach other entrepreneurs how to set up businesses in a way that you do have all the things that you envisioned originally, and you don't find yourself stuck 3 years from now not being able to get out of it, right?
Yeah. I feel like we should have done this episode there because of my love for whiskey and good haircuts.
Well, next time you come down, I'll run it by Ben and see if we can do that, man.
Cool.
But so let's move forward in your sales career, because I definitely want to get onto Springbuk, and of course we're going to be cutting up a lot of content around that. But before you went to Springbuk, you said you got a corporate sales job. So I do want to hear about what you were doing and how that went, and then ultimately what led to Springbuk.
Yeah, and silly me for thinking that a better quality of life would come from a sales job. But no, it has been a very rewarding career thus far. But so yeah, I ended up losing all that money on a Tuesday, I want to say, and that was when I ultimately decided, okay, I'm done. I need to move on. And I reached out to a company that had offered me a job right out of college, and I turned them down. And I reached back out to that recruiter and apologized.
You're like, on second thought?
Yeah, she's the best. Sarah Swanson, I don't know if you still listen to anything I put out there on LinkedIn, but literally, like, I wouldn't be in sales if it wasn't for her. So ended up taking a job at Insight Global. They're one of the largest IT staffing and recruiting firms in the country. I think at the time it was somewhere around like 6,000 or 7,000 people. And it was great because, I was cold calling 120, 140 times a day. If I got someone live on the phone, my boss would want me to put it on speaker. And it was just like ultimate stress and anxiety.
Boiler room style sales.
Yeah, but it was great. It gave me a tough skin. And I think it kind of broke the millennial spirit of just being entitled and thinking that I deserve this grandiose job with this insane pay without putting any effort in, that I've seen a lot take place in conversations with friends and even people looking for work at Springbuk. But it made me really grind it out. And I'm very fortunate for my time there. I was actually only there maybe 8-9 months. Was climbing the ladder and loving it, but ultimately just meeting the co-founders of Springbuk, I fell in love with the idea of, actually getting able to or having the ability to interact with the founders directly. I think when I joined, I was like the 17th employee about 6 years ago, and now we have about 125.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long ago was, what was the origin date? Or do you remember, not the exact date, but the year?
Yeah, so we really launched publicly, really went to market with our first product in 2015.
Okay.
I think they had actually started it in 2014. But yeah, officially probably started taking on clients.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the MVP, the minimum viable product launch in tech for sure. I experienced that with the Plan Site, managing our first client, and obviously you feel your market ready. Everybody, you do all this building and market due diligence and conversations, and then you launch it and you realize how maybe it wasn't quite ready for prime time, or if you were, it's not necessarily it wasn't ready. It's you don't know what you don't know until you put it out there, right? And get feedback from your customers. So you were there for that. Were you there almost for that original launch, or a little later after that?
I was there after the original launch, and then I joined about maybe 6 or 9 months before we had raised our Series B funding.
Okay.
And I think that for any tech company, that's a huge pivotal moment for them of when things really start to change. So fortunately, just being there before then, I got to see and kind of grow and learn through that.
Cool.
Which was awesome.
Well, so let's go into the what is Springbuk real quick. And I even think the name Springbuk has a pretty cool story you were sharing with me earlier. So I'd love to hear you tell that story. I think because it shapes what I believe is the brand quite well. And so would you mind sharing that real quick?
Yeah, so Springbuk, spring is in the season, BUK is what I would say when I'm cold calling someone who's trying to get me off the phone. So Springbuk, we are named after the South African gazelle, which is the Springbuk. And as I was telling you earlier, one of our co-founders, Rod, he did a lot of mission work in Africa and really fell in love with the Springbuk. Again, this massive gazelle down there. And the Springbuk is the second fastest land animal, and its leaps in between its strides are roughly 17 feet. And so when we were thinking of a name for the company, they had really decided on that ultimately because we want to be taking these massive leaps. When you think of innovation, we want to be as fast as we possibly can. We don't want to be, taking baby steps or being slow to move. We want to be really agile, really quick, and really innovative.
Well, I also said there's probably a grace. I can't picture the animal running, but I'm sure there's a gracefulness about them running as well, where it's like there's almost an elegance, if you will, in that type of animal. How fast they are, the power they have, but also the grace in which they run.
I don't think they're one that has as many human deaths associated to it.
Well, that's good.
While it is running really fast and leaping, and I don't quote me. Well, we are quoting you.
I'm literally quoting you right now.
It's not one like a shark or something like that, where it's oh, this is a really fast animal, but it's terrifying.
Yeah, it murders human beings. Well, that's good. Yeah, because you want to disassociate yourself from that for sure. But so Springbuk has an organization. Mike, I like that you and I have a similar sense of humor.
Yeah, this is a dangerous episode.
So Springbuk, though, what did we do? Let's go ahead and talk about what we do, because a lot of people that tune in love to hear the story and they love to hear about who you are, and that there's a reason why I do that flow that way.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they're tuning in because they want to learn something or they want to learn about a solution that's in the marketplace. So real quick, if you don't mind, define what Springbuk does and what category you exist in.
Yeah, so Springbuk is a data analytics platform within the healthcare space. We are typically working in the self-funded employer market, but we have a lot of fully insured groups as well. What we're doing is we are taking in all of these disparate data sources like medical data, RX data, eligibility are the three standards we look for, but then we'll even take in things like clinic, biometric screening data. For some of our larger clients, we'll take in ancillary data, and we're combining that all into allowing us to be a single source of truth. As you know, my past as a former professional musician, I always like to say we're creating that one sheet of music that everyone can play to, really for the first time.
Okay.
So
I
would say everyone involved in the decision-making process for an employer-sponsored health plan can look at the same dashboards at the same time and actually use data to guide and drive their decisions.
Well, that's like, so I think a term I would use is collaborative, because that's something that applies to what I do at PlantSight as well, where it's like, we're inviting everyone into the fold to participate in a system that's similarly structured on both sides. And then even internally within your organization, you can manage data together collectively, right? So there's a collaboration that sometimes is missing in the equation of an RFP. I imagine it's missing within the equation of where all these data sources are coming from as well, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the other thing that is unique to Springbuk and a certain part of the marketplace is, as we've all probably learned lately with everything going on with AI, is we're using all these technologies that have existed for years, maybe even a decade, in every other industry. For whatever reason, healthcare has not hit refresh since like 1985, it seems like. When you look at like most websites out there, when you look at what technology they're using behind the scenes. So what we've done is we've brought in all of the modern technologies, like different forms of artificial intelligence, so deep machine learning, natural language processing. We're bringing in predictive modeling and all these other things that we can enhance this really confusing data, so that people can log in and immediately know what they're looking at. I feel like, and maybe it's on purpose, healthcare data is so complex. And again, there might be some reasoning as to why. But what we're doing is we're taking it and putting it into bite-sized chunks, so everyone involved in that decision-making process knows what they're looking at and can act accordingly, using the right data at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, data in and of itself isn't necessarily useful, right? There's got to be structure to that data, and then a human being's got to be able to interpret it and make sense of it, right? And then you can manage it, because now you can finally measure it. But if it's from these different sources, there's not really any sort of structure, or everybody has their own different structure. Until you normalize it, it's not that useful. Or at least not as useful as it could be. Right? And so part of what you're doing is pulling that all in, and you become the single system of truth by making it digestible. Right? Okay. Talk to me about that process though, like, kind of feeds and stuff like that. Like, how does that data come into us?
So what we're going to do is we're going to reach out directly to the carrier, TPA, PBM, on-site clinic on behalf of our clients, and we will bring that data into our system, where then our system will like normalize it. We'll enrich it with, we love, Optum Symmetry suite of solutions that they've built out. So we enrich the data with those, as well as some proprietary risk models and algorithms that we've built out internally, to, again, not only make it easier to understand, but make it more actionable. So, hey, I have, X amount of diabetics on my population. Great, not great, but what do we do with that? How do we actually take that and turn that into action? So what Springbuk's going to do is show you, hey, here's how many you have that are not compliant with their diagnosis. And if you know the healthcare journey of a diabetic, there are a ton of different steps that they need to take to become compliant. And so rather than looking at compliance as a binary yes or no, is someone compliant or not, what our system is going to do is show you, here are those folks that need their HbA1c tests. Here are those folks that haven't had their eye exam. Here are folks that might just need help with medication management. There are so many steps that each individual step, you really need to take a different approach with them. And so we're helping people see, without even necessarily showing them who the individual is on the other side. It's showing them, here's how you could be even more targeted with your efforts. Which I think is really, really helpful for our clients.
And one of the things you said that you can't take action on it, like data that only gives you like clear insights in retrospect, there's utility in that, right? But it's also like, well, what do I do now with it? Or how do I stop that? Or how do I mitigate that thing, right? So you have to be able to look forward and now apply what you've learned to do something useful in return. So how would I go about doing that? Like, you were using the example of the diabetic situation, right? Where there's an entire episode of care, there's all sorts of protocol. But let's say I know I have an overrepresentation of diabetics on my plan. Like, how would the data that Springbuk is now giving me turn that into something actionable if I'm a broker that might be able to advise, or if I'm an employer that might be able to reach out and help correct?
Yeah, so within our platform, what you're able to do is to drill in on key cohorts within the population. We call them focus populations. I think in the industry, a lot of people will call them cohorts where, let's say we have 250 non-compliant diabetics. Well, then being able to compare how those non-compliant diabetics compare on a cost perspective to the average across the group really helps a CFO or folks in that decision-making role say, okay, if this is going to take more budget from us, is the juice worth the squeeze? And so if it is just coming to a financial decision and you're looking at budgets, our system's going to show you, what impact could you have and would that justify the spend or effort it would take? But then beyond that, and arguably my favorite part of our platform, is we have a feature called Timeline that actually shows you a pinpoint in the data, and it'll say, hey, we rolled out this specific disease management vendor.
Mm-hmm.
We work a lot with RightWay. And so let's say someone rolls out and implements RightWay on January 1st of 2023. Then our data, it's agnostic. We have no reason to manipulate it. And there's a really important piece of that is we don't want to have a reason to manipulate it, which is why we don't do any sort of wellness engagement ourselves. Sure. So what we'll do is we'll say, hey, you rolled out RightWay on January of 2023. How did if you're tracking just cost specifically, how did your cost of those that engage with RightWay versus those that did not engage with RightWay that should have, how did those compare month over month? Are we seeing the needle be moved the way we need to? And then to correct course and double down, it's do we just need more engagement or education for those members, or do we need to rethink kind of what our approach is here? So rather than waiting on a specific vendor or carrier to tell you about how great of a job they're doing, again, we're all sales, so we want to manipulate the data to tell a positive story. But when it comes to, such an important, the second biggest line item in any U.S.-based employer is their healthcare spend, being able to tell an accurate, unmanipulated story of ROI or lack thereof, I think that's a key contribution that we're making to our clients.
Well, so, you obviously have been doing this for a number of years, but I'm curious, what have you learned in selling a SaaS-based data analytics platform? Because you obviously came to the fold with the sales boot camp that you went through, if you will. And then now you're selling a product that has a technical component to it. It has a conceptual component to it. And then you're obviously selling mostly through a broker distribution channel. So talk to me about some of the things that you've learned, how to artfully convey this.
Yeah, I think and I always feel weird saying this, but I'll explain why I feel okay with it. I think COVID and the pandemic really helped companies like Springbuk. And I say I feel bad saying it because, there's so much bad that came with COVID.
Well, it's oddly enough, it's been a subject we've covered a couple times on this podcast. I think everybody can parse those things and recognize there was some net benefit to it as well. I can relate.
Yeah. I think it's important as human beings that we find whether it's a silver lining or a positive spin, because you saw, such a huge toll mentally that the pandemic and this massive kind of paradigm shift that took place in all of us. I think to find any sort of positive spin on it is great. So that's why I don't mind saying it. But what was great is, from a sales perspective, so many people in like your 101 will say, simplify your messaging down so that your grandma can understand it. Well, Nanny, if you're listening, she thought that I worked for free, and I think she thinks I have the world's crappiest job, which it's like a running joke with my cousins and I that she thinks like I work for free and my company doesn't do anything. But it wasn't until COVID when everyone was looking at data all the time. Yeah. Granted, it was a little bit different data, but the CDC and all these other entities were putting out data on a daily basis. And so finally, I didn't have to speak on a hypothetical situation as to like why someone would even be looking at data on a monthly basis, because unless you were an early adopter on technology, it was a lot of education from a selling standpoint. And so COVID really helped in that standpoint of like, rather than me use the diabetic example or talk through like Remicade and looking at J codes or something like that, which for many listeners might have just lost them then. COVID was easy to just use that as an example and to say, hey, this is, we have all this data already for, at the time it was maybe 3,000 employers. Here's what we're seeing in the data in real time.
Very cool.
And that made it a lot easier. But
well, and I wonder if you had this experience, but like at first I resisted selling over a Zoom. Then I discovered that, if I'm screen sharing and I'm selling software and they're looking at the software as if they were using it and I'm conveying it through a screen, which will be on doing their job within the software, like it's a very natural way to sell, actually. And then I almost uncovered over the period of time, like when I would go in person and do a demonstration, it was almost better just sitting there at the computer at that point and demonstrating it, right? Because I'd done it so much. But it was for the way to translate or communicate the benefits of a piece of software. What better to do it than over a shared screen on a Zoom? Like it was a perfect fit.
Yeah, and I think before people moved to a work from home or work from anywhere environment, even, there are many that went back in the office, but I think every consulting house or brokerage firm at some point at least, went home for, maybe it was a matter of weeks, maybe it was a couple months, and we learned, because you were selling to them as well, that they had no good use of technology, the lion's share of them. And so I think that just showed, I remember pre-COVID, I would go on site to present, and we use Apple products. So I'd show up with my MacBook, and it would take 30 minutes just to figure out how to share my screen on this massive TV they had. And now it's like, they've updated everything. So I will say it seems like we're moving in a more tech savvy way, hopefully.
Well, and I bet, do you like selling technology too? I mean, do you the speed at which things can evolve, and there's a sexiness, I'm sure, about the product. I haven't actually, I've seen it once, and it does look very good, but there's a sexiness, right? A little bit about showing updated software to companies that maybe don't deploy as much updated software, right? Like there's a wow factor to it. Sometimes.
I think what was tough back when I was flipping houses is at the end of the day, I could just look and see exactly what I did that day. And that was so rewarding. Granted, my craftsmanship is shoddy at best, but my project management skills were a lot better. But that I feel like is a tough part of just working in tech or in SaaS in general. But I think it is awesome because you don't have to download anything onto your computer. You don't have to we don't have like a device that needs to be on site. It's just like you have a computer, you have a phone, you could use Springbuk.
You can log in.
So that part is nice, is it removes so many barriers, and it kind of creates a limitless option of who we could benefit by people using.
Yeah, and I want to go back to the solution itself, but I appreciate you talking about that because I just want to connect with you over selling within the framework that we sell, because we don't have similar products, but I think the way that we have to speak about them and the way that we convey them to an audience is probably similar in how we move them to hopefully decide to use us.
Yeah.
But what about, the actual, let's go on the ground for a second, employer fit for something like a Springbuk. You mentioned earlier they don't have to be self-funded, but oftentimes it makes the most sense. But talk to me about a good fit for you. What types of employers would benefit from using this type of tool?
Yeah, I would say there's not necessarily an industry niche that we have. Like when you think of an employer, whether it's manufacturing, government, municipalities, we have a wide gamut of industries represented. And we also have a massive range of size of employers. Again, going back to us being really the analytics leader in the captive space. So, that takes us all the way down to 50 employees. I really think if you're talking self-funded or fully insured, I think there's power to having around 200 employees on the plan is when we confidently can get the data and can act on it. But I think when I really see the system being used in its full ability is right when it's about 750 employees or more.
Okay.
Because there is, power and scale, and just being able to see something in the data and actually act on it when there are, more than 7 people identified on something. I just think really where I see, not just the broker consulting being involved, but also the employer logging in on at least a monthly basis is typically right around the 7.
Okay, but I guess maybe the inverse question I'll pose to you as well: who's not really a fit, or where have you just not been able to find a way to get that type of employer? Is it just under 50 or fully insured or no data? I'm sure a combination of all those things.
Yeah, I think typically smaller, under 50 is very tough. Fully insured is definitely difficult as well. But I think also if you're a group that isn't really wanting to change at all, it doesn't really make sense to have access to your data in such a real-time way. But I think because we have some that, we can show really great things and, you could see all these ways that you could take action, but then they ultimately don't decide to go self-funded. They stay fully insured. They're going to pay the same premium. So it's like, well, not to unsell or not do my job, but it kind of seems like you're wasting money on utilizing us if you don't ever plan to go self-funded.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's got to be, say, a will, like you said, to change, right? I think people overuse the term status quo, but if you're bought into the status quo, which is that fully insured renewals year after year, where they're getting those 15, 18, 20% increases that are seemingly inexplicable, or at least they'll tell you it's because of your pool or tell you whatever, right? Excuse is made up, or not made up, but is used. If you don't want to combat that or have any control over your destiny, then sure, continue along that. But like you said, a data analytics platform is effectively useless if you don't deploy any changes underlying the plan.
Yeah. And I would say a lot of times, like what we saw early on is, again, data analytics now is I think most would agree it is a need to have. It's not a nice to have anymore.
Yeah.
If you have a self-funded group of any size and you're a consultant and you don't have data analytics in place that you're actually putting in front of the client, you will lose that group to another firm that will come in and offer them access to a system like Springbuk or
well, I think it's become. I think it's necessary. I mean, I don't think there's any other way to shape it, right? I mean, you get some decent reports from the TPAs, maybe your PBMs give you decent reports, but like it's really drilling into the insights with combining those things together and looking for, where are my cost drivers? Like what is the thing that in my own population at this moment in time is actually costing me money, right? And being able to drill down to the level that you can glean that information. And if you're not doing that, like you said, you're kind of, it's a losing proposition at this point. Do you feel like your segment or your category has reached a level of saturation where it's become the norm to have a platform in place? Or are we still trying to get there?
I go back and forth on that. Okay. But I will say something you had said, a lot of times there will be TPAs that offer great reports. But what happens if you leave that TPA? I think there's power in having a system of your own. But I think, sometimes I feel like, we are getting to a point where, at least from a broker house, consulting house perspective, a lot of them have made a decision on some sort of standard platform that they're leveraging. But I think if you ask me or anyone else in the data analytics space at a number of our competitors, there are still a shocking amount of firms and employers that I would say should be on an analytics platform that are getting nothing today.
Well, I'd almost say that it's still an infinite marketplace, right? They're so huge. Like nobody's ever going to fully saturate it, right? Themselves, and even the category might still not fully saturate it because there's just too many new companies that pop off. There's so many small companies, right? It would be impossible, which is also a good opportunity for us as salespeople is to go out and tell that message every single day and hopefully pick up some wins. But I liked how you sort of positioned that because I was going to ask you like almost a call to action, if you will. If somebody wasn't using a platform now, like what would you say to them? And it's almost like at this point it is there's an argument to be made that it is a necessity at this point. Yeah.
I don't really like selling through fear.
Nah, it's not. Yeah, it's not a fear-based sell.
But will. No, it's but you will. Let me look. Whatever. I'm talking to you. No, it is. I see it often of good-sized groups, large revenue accounts for different firms that they are losing these groups, and maybe in many cases I can probably rattle off 12 off the top of my head that. Someone had this group on Springbuk, but they were just checking a box with kind of our services. And unfortunately, and again, I'm not saying that they were lazy or anything. As a consultant, you have so many things you need to cover with your groups. And unfortunately, just analytics never came up. But when it did come up, they were playing defense. Even though they already had that group on Springbuk, they were taking the defensive, and that group had already been wowed by someone, and so that just puts them in a tough spot.
Well, so as you guys are probably constantly thinking about this, and I know this space is still emerging to a degree, right? I wouldn't say it's a mature segment. What will be the evolution? What are some of the things you guys are talking about? Like, hey, what are we going to accomplish? What do we need to add to our suite of services? What are we trying to solve for? I would like to hear a little bit of future looking of a Springbuk or data analytics in general.
Yeah, I think, I would say Springbuk, but also, data analytics in general. I think any of the real thought-leading analytics companies out there would likely agree with this. That where I see this going is, a marketplace of sorts where, we have the data. How can we share that data in more real time with other parties that need it?
Okay.
In a, obviously a PHI safe way. But then also I think back to the technology conversation, I think we're moving in a way that you simply cannot not embrace technology and what it's doing for our industry, specifically speaking to healthcare. But as we were talking before, when I look at finances and working with my wife and I's financial advisors, I have all these tools available to me in different apps that I use, in different services I have, in different ways that I can quickly get up to speed, so that when I do have conversations with my advisors, they're intelligent and I'm coming to the table with questions, and then they're having to level up and have those conversations with me as well. I think we're starting to see more and more employers reach out to us and say, hey, I'm interested in knowing more. And then, just knowing the role a consultant plays is like, okay, well, let's loop in your broker now so they don't hate me.
They don't ostracize me.
Yeah, I don't want to get in the way of that. But I think kind of two ways there is one, again, how can more parties have access to the needed data? So say that's a wellness vendor of sort, and just getting everyone to look at the same data and share data with one another is really powerful. And I see that being, there's no way around that really. Again, as long as all legal pieces are in place from a PHI standpoint. And then the other one is just embracing more technology. I don't know that we're going to have, AI completely write code for us. I hope not, because our developers and engineers are awesome. Mm-hmm. But I think embracing just some of the different technology that's available to us to continuously make ourselves better and more efficient. I
think like any technology, it's going to ultimately empower the people that embrace it. I mean, I don't necessarily want to say all technology is good and all progress is good, but I think what will happen is likely you put those tools in the hands of already skilled people, they're just going to supercharge it. I actually saw a guy post a video the other day where he verbally, through Siri, he created a plugin where he could give it verbal prompts, and it ultimately created him a landing page with like a newsletter sign up. He did the color. I mean, it was in like 3-minute time frame. He verbally is prompting. It was responding and saying, yep, processing. And he went and created a live landing page website just verbally. So again, like I could do that maybe as a novice if I kind of knew what to prompt, but you put it in the hands of a developer and man, it's going to be incredible what they can produce. And so I don't see it as displacement so much as augmenting the people that are already skilled. Yeah.
I don't think we could ever get rid of the importance of skilled and knowledgeable human beings in our industry. I could point to so many super users that I work with day in and day out that, there's no way that you could ever remove them from the scenario. But I think, it's probably for any brokerage firm out there, you're just going to have to empower more people to get to a super user level at something like analytics, at, other, not just talking about analytics here, but any technology out there that's relevant to their employers. If you're not taking the time to build out that extremely knowledgeable practice, which one of your competitors as another brokerage firm are, and how long is it until they start reaching out to your employees?
Well, how do you avoid kind of a paralysis by analysis? Because there are certain people that want to dig in and get their hands really dirty and come up with all sorts of crazy like tables I'm sure that they built themselves. And there's other folks that are just go, give me the monthly claims report, give me the ag report, give me the spec report, give me the top 10 conditions, and let me go on and go have that conversation. So how do you give a pared down version for people that just need it from an efficiency standpoint?
Yeah, we do that as well. So we have all of those canned reports. I think we're going through our library today. We have roughly 100 of them available that, you can really go as deep as you want into the data. And, a lot of times people will choose maybe 10 of those. It'll be like their standard go-to that they're just, going in every month and that's what they're going to look at. But also what our system specifically is doing, again, using artificial intelligence, is it's going to serve up every area of actionable opportunities to the forefront of our platform in a specific part. It's called insights. And so someone would log in and it'll say, okay, do we want to filter by what could potentially have the greatest financial impact to this plan, or the one that would have maybe the greatest clinical or which one would impact the most number of members? So, maybe that's folks with a mental health condition. Maybe that's non-utilizers of healthcare. Whatever that might be, we're serving that up. And what we do, I think what we do very well, and I would argue better than anyone else in the space, is our client success team is incredible. And what they'll do is they'll walk through our partners and clients on, let's take one or two of these insights per quarter and let's really be good at that, rather than, the jack of all trades, master of none ideology that I've kind of built my life on is, let's spread ourselves as thin as we possibly can. We don't want to do that. It's like, you could easily be overwhelmed by all this data, but let's take one or two of these that we can actually make real improvements on in 3 months, 6 months. And then again, let's revisit that and see how we're doing. And if we need to add another one or two, and we feel like we have, those first two in a good spot, let's bring more.
Well, it's
into
eating
the
the elephant one bite at a time, right?
Yeah.
Like you can't just go ahead and devour it in one fell swoop. And I think that's how you should approach any software. It's like, I have this, intentional way that I present what we do over at PlanSight in a way that's like, I could show them features over the course of 3 hours. And literally I call it featuring them to death, where it's just like feature after feature after feature. You could do this and that. And it's like, you've lost them 90 minutes ago if you try to do that. So you have to find out, like, what are the elements to that human being that ultimately will motivate them to change? What are the points that you can touch on? And you do that by conveying a vision of maybe the future of state of their lives by using a tool. And so you have to find those things that are simple enough but impactful enough. That's where you focus on. And I think this Pareto principle, 80-20, right? That's where most of change is actually made, is in that 80%, and that other 20% are shiny objects and things like that. That you end up just losing somebody if you try to force in there. Yeah,
and I forget, back to what you all do at PlanSight, I forget what I had pitched to my friends at
I think you called us a TPA admin network, and they're like, dude, that wasn't even close.
Hey, it worked.
I'll arm you in the future with a better sentence
I'm over
or two
here
to convey.
selling Spencer Smith to people totally incorrectly, but
hey, but you got worked. Enough charm and influence that you get me in the door, regardless, man. I appreciate that.
No, Brady and Connor are just good people.
They are good people,
and they felt bad for me.
They were really excited after I got a chance to show them, man. But anyway, so let's kind of close the loop on this podcast, man, and talk a little bit of big picture stuff. We talked big picture, future state of maybe data analytics, but what is your kind of impression? You said you're 31, right? So you've been in this industry 6-7 years now. What is your impression of kind of where are we going in the healthcare space? Like, what do you think is going to happen over the next couple of years? Big stuff.
Yeah. Man, that's tough.
So let me give you maybe something that might impact you, like the CAA. Kind of the responsibilities, the fiduciary responsibilities of employers once they get access to data. Is that something you guys are having conversations a lot about right now?
Yeah, we are. And we're looking, I think there are a couple ways you could go about it, is, spend all of the money and power ourselves to build that out. We're really looking at two key partners to kind of come alongside of us and really help us collaborate in a way to get where we need to be. What we've done is we've had, on our podcast, we've had folks come on board and speak to that, and we'll have one-off conversations with a lot of our consultant partners on what that might mean to them. But yeah, we're definitely thinking through what partnerships would look like in order to fully embrace and educate in relation to that. I think in our industry in general, I think a couple things. One, as I mentioned before, I think technology will play a greater role. Just when you think through transparency and everything, I believe that just having access to all the data, again, not relevant just to data analytics, but in any decision to be made in our industry, I think we're just going to see the release of more data. I think we've seen round one of that with some of the transparency, but still, there's smoke and mirrors being played. My wife and I experience that a lot with her epilepsy. There are a lot of claims that come through, a lot of tests, blood work that needs to be done. We get balance billed all the time. And, I work at Springbuk and I've been here for 6 years. Her mom is like a rock star pharmaceutical sales rep and understands the healthcare industry extremely well. And even like us two collaborating together, there's still it's like a $570 bill that we have no clue where it came from. And we've each called like 8 different numbers multiple times and can't find out where that's coming from. And so I think hopefully, again, I hope to see that technology and also a younger workforce that doesn't accept the status quo, maybe to an annoying amount. The generation that was taught to ask why.
We need so it reminds me of my 2-year-old. Like literally, you said exactly. Like, we need the people going, why? Why? Over and over again until people get so frustrated and go, okay, fine. Like I'll explain it, right? That's where the answers come from.
The response of, well, that's just the way it works, no longer is accepted in any industry or situation. Due to millennials and Zoomers. So I'm hoping that generation and having a younger workforce that challenges everything to a fault, I'm hoping will break down some barriers and maybe systemic, I don't know that corruption is the right word, but just lack of needing to change.
I call it suboptimal behavior if you want to be sort of diplomatic about it. But there's entrenched behaviors that we all know need to be corrected, right? But there's a lot of competing forces or incentives that are keeping those behaviors entrenched, and it does need a collective voice of people questioning that consistently.
And I think the younger or just newer workforce, you see a lot of people pivoting careers, and so I've seen folks, well older than myself, come into this industry for the first time ever in their 40s. And so they're bringing a whole career of, whether it was software sales, something completely unrelated to healthcare. And now they're able to try to problem solve in this industry with a fresh set of eyes, which I think man, as
much as I can do to recruit the best and the brightest in this industry, man, whether they're 60 years old or 19, I hope we can have some level of influence by highlighting these types of conversations. So Mike, last thought, give you an opportunity for the closing thoughts. The floor is yours to close out the podcast. What do you want to say?
Man, well, that's tough. I wasn't ready for that one. I would say one from a Springbuk side. If you are listening to this podcast and you don't have analytics today, whether you're an employer, consultant, or a TPA, and you want to have a conversation, I'd love to chat. But I think beyond that, man, it's just so good to be here in person and sit through and talk through a lot of this. I've been here for a number of hours now, and just this sort of conversation I don't think happens enough in most people's lives. And so I think it's just good. And I would encourage folks, if you haven't had a conversation to chat with my friend Spencer here, definitely reach out, because as awesome as this is as an opportunity for Springbuk, personally, it's even more impactful.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, man. And this is an opportunity to really forge relationships. Like, we've already been friends for a number of years, but it's like you get to deeply know somebody. And most people don't get a chance to talk to somebody, another human being, one-on-one for a couple hours, right? There's just something, I think, very dynamic and I think holy about that, if I want to use that word, that I feel blessed to be able to do. So thanks for coming down, man. I appreciate it.
I'm shocked we never talked about Tool or any bands at all, but
that's part two. I couldn't figure out where we're going to weave music in. So there's a good reason to have you back in a little while.
There we go.
Yeah, I'll give you some time. Obviously, you traveled in from Indiana.
I'll bring a drum set with me.
There you go. You give a drum lesson. You talked about having everybody together with one sheet of music.
Right? I could give a drum lesson.
Right.
I did first college class I ever took. I was in high school, and it was the art of speech, and you had to give a kind of a how-to, and mine was how to do a drum solo, and I was a 16-year-old high school kid, and everyone else in the class was a junior or senior in college. And man, did I stumble through that. So I'll brush up on it and come back.
Well, you did significantly better than that for the course of this podcast episode.
You.
So Mike, again, thank you so much for coming down. Thank you to Springbuk, obviously, for letting you lend your voice. And I'm excited to share this in the future. But it's been great, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.